The snowstorm that began 3 days ago wiped out landmarks, distances, and the distinction between the sky and the ground. They will call this winter the Great Death. But now you don't think from the perspective of history or names. You only think about the next hour, the next task, the next small victory over the cold. And that cold wants to turn your blood into ice. You flung your legs off the wooden bunk, but your boots still stood in place, as stiff as statues. Although the leather is close to the stove, it has frozen over at night. When you try to put them on, they resist, as if they have forgotten the shape of your feet. Around you, other experts are moving in the darkness before dawn. Everyone is a shadow, undergoing the same reorganization ceremony. No one speaks because speaking requires energy, and energy is a kind of currency that you cannot waste. The air in the bunk room was filled with the smell of unwashed wool, leather that hadn't dried for weeks and smoke rising from the stove. You inhale it because you have no choice. It wraps a thin film around your lungs, making every breath you take feel very strenuous. Someone managed to get the stove through the night, although the fire was more of a memory than a flame. Instinctively, you walked towards it and joined the silent crowd, who stood there with their hands stretched out, waiting for their fingers to regain sensation. When the coffee is served, it is so strong that it can be chewed. It is made from coffee grounds that have been used twice and has a metallic flavor of deionizing water. Anyway, you still drank it, holding the tin cup with both hands and letting the heat seep into your palms. The wind outside has been blowing for 72 hours. It's not as howling as the wind you knew before. It maintains a continuous wailing just as the world itself is screened. When you put on your coat, it's actually 3 coats stacked on top of each other. The canvas cloth covers the wool jacket and the flannel shirt. The flannel shirt used to be red, but now it is the cover of old blood and smoke. The outermost layer is frozen hard with sweat. When you move, it makes a crackling sound, and every step you take indicates your presence. Wrap your face with a scarf until only your eyes are exposed. Even so, you should close your eyes to block the wind. You already know that the cold will find moisture, tears, breathing, and the slight dampness at the corners of the mouth, and turn it into ice. The door opened and the wind rushed in, just like something that had been waiting all along, hungry and patient. For a moment, the outside world was completely white. You didn't know if you were watching the snow or if it had already snowed and was now thrown back into the air. You go out, and the cold strikes you with a physical force. It's not the fresh and cool air of an autumn morning, but something thicker, something that presses on your chest and makes your lungs hurt with every breath. The bunkhouse is located on the edge of what was once a visible prairie, but now every direction is white. The fence emerged from the snow, like the mast of a sunken ship. Between them, horses stood facing the wind, their manes covered with thick frost. You walked towards them, and with each step you had to deal with the snow, which had accumulated up to your waist. Your legs are burning with effort. You think about today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. As long as the snowstorm continues, you will walk the same path more than 10 times. When you approach, the horses turn their heads. You can see that ice has formed on their eyelashes and their nostrils and at the edges of their mouths. The breathing there has frozen and solidified. They looked at you with neither accusation nor hope, only patience, as if they had accepted what you were still fighting against. You start to examine them, stroke their backs and legs with your hand, and feel if there are any signs of injury or a fall. Even with thick gloves on, your hands can hardly feel anything. You are worried that you might miss something important. In such cold weather, a tiny wound could be fatal overnight. One of the mares had a piece of ice on her coat, which was where she had lain at night. And you knew you should have chiseled it off, but your fingers were to numb. You remember in your heart to repay with warm hands, knowing that you might not, knowing that this small oversight is the reason why things fall apart here. The saddles were hung on the fence, each covered with a thin layer of snow, which seeped into every crack and opening, and the leather beneath was as cold as metal. It is so hard that it hardly bends. Saddling a horse in such cold weather is a silent act of violence. The buckle is not secure. If the belt doesn't fit, The horse will move and stomp its feet, because the frozen leather on its abdomen feels as if it's being pressed by ice. To be precise, it's not words, but just comforting voices. Your voice was blocked by the scarf. You wondered if she could hear your voice in the wind, or if she just tolerated your presence because she had no choice. When you finally got on the horse, the saddle was clumped under you. Even though you were wearing layer of clothes, you could still feel the cold. The horse moved unwillingly, measuring with each step, as if she were calculating the energy consumption of each step. You rode your horse toward the place where the deer herd was. Although going out by bike sounds like a trip with a direction and purpose, really, you just moved to the white area. I hope your sense of direction hasn't been completely wiped out by the storm. The other experts are somewhere here, scattered in places that could be identified in the pass. You might pass by another rider less than 10 feet away without even realizing it. His ability is very low. When you finally find the cows, they are huddled together and look more like an organism than a single animal. They squeeze themselves very tightly. The ones in the middle might be warmed, but the ones outside were bearing all the force of the wind. You slowly circle them and count them, even though you know your count is incomplete. Some have already drifted into the storm, following some instinct to keep them away from the deer herd and head towards isolated death. The rest were covered with ice, and their coats had turned into frozen shells. When they move, you can hear the sound of ice cracking, which is like shattering glass and for some reason can even be carried by the wind. Your task is to keep them constantly moving, preventing them from remaining stationary for too long and completely freezing, or piling up in a heap, where they will be suffocated by the weight of their own quantity. But moving them requires making them care about survival. You can see from their eyes that some of them no longer care. You gently push them, using your horse to push those who fall behind, and speak to them in the same low voice as you would to your mare. Some people responded, taking a few reluctant steps, while others stared at you with icy eyes. The work lasted for several hours, or it felt like several hours. Here, time has become unreliable and can only be measured by the pain in your legs, back and shoulders. At some point, someone handed you a hard candy from the saddlebag, and you ate it without even taking a taste. Chewing is very difficult because your chin is too cold and it doesn't want move normally. You find yourself thinking about the last hot meal you had, trying to recall its taste. Is it beef? Beans? You can't recall, and not remembering is more annoying to you than the cold. The wind direction changed. For a moment, just for a moment, you could see 10 feet away. In that brief window of visibility, you saw another rider in the distance, a black figure against a white backdrop. You felt a surge, perhaps relief, or perhaps just the realization that you were not entirely alone here. Then the wind direction changed again and he disappeared. You doubt whether he is something you imagined. Here, the boundary between reality and what your brain creates to comfort itself becomes very thin. You find a dead calf half-minus buried in a snowdrift, its body already stiff. You should drag it away from the herd, but you don't have the strength. Besides, by tomorrow, it will be completely covered and no one will know where it was. This is what they didn't tell you about the life of a cowboy, about the romance of the open space. They won't tell you the mathematics of death, won't tell you how to calculate losses, won't tell you whether the deer herd can survive until spring. They won't tell you that the coldness within you will never completely leave. Even if you lie in the bunk, even if you are pressed down on the stove, it will live in your bones and take it as your home. Noon arrived, but the light remained unchanged. The sky was still the same grayish minus white as it was after the blizzard began. You realized that you no longer knew whether it was really snowing or if just redistributing the snow that fell yesterday or the day before. Your horse stumbled, got up and kept moving forward. You could sense her exhaustion from the saddle. She felt that every step became more difficult for her. It's time for you to go back. Let her have a rest and also give yourself a rest. But going back means admitting that a day's work is done. You're not sure if you've done well enough to call it a day. Back has become a theoretical concept. You think you know where the bunk is, but you got the wrong direction before coming here. The consequences of getting the wrong direction in a snowstorm are not abstract. Another ox's hand emerged from the white, and this time you could see his face, although most of it was hidden behind a frozen scarf. And you nodded at him too. This is all the communication you have the energy to have. He led a small herd of cows, perhaps a dozen or so, and pushed them in the direction you thought was right. They moved like sleepwalkers, placing one hoof in front of the other, without any obvious awareness of where they were going. You fall behind it and join in its efforts. Together, you lead this small group of elephants through the endless white. Although not much, it is still meaningful. Here, some things are everything. The afternoon passed slowly, although calling it an afternoon was just a habit. Light never changes. The wind never stopped, and you began to feel as if you had been here for a long time, as if you had never been before this storm. Your hand has transcended the coldness and turned into a nearly calm numbness. You can still move your fingers and still hold the raindrops, but you no longer feel them. There is a part of your brain that knows it's dangerous, but you concentrate on doing anything. You recalled those letters you had written in your saddlebag a few weeks ago. Because you couldn't send them out. You never did. One is written to your mother. One is about a girl you met in Texas. One type is not targeted at a specific person, but just the words you need to write down. They are all frozen now, the paper has hardened, and the ink might have been damaged due to moisture seeping in. You want to know if they will be understood by others and if someone will know what you want to say. Suddenly, a gust of wind almost blew you off the saddle. You grabbed the horn to steady yourself. Your horse charged around recklessly. For a moment, you thought you were about to fall down, but she regained her footing and you got back on it. This is when you see it. Eye shape in the snow, not a cow, not a drifting object, nor another rider. This is a horse lying on its side with the rider squatting beside it. You slowly approached. As you got closer, you realized that the horse was already dead, frozen at the place where it had fallen. The rider tried to rescue his saddle and gear before they froze. When you approached, he looked up at you. Even through his scarf, you could see the failure in his eyes. Losing a horse here is not merely losing an animal. It will make you lose your ability to act, work, and even survive. You made a gesture to your horse, indicating that you were willing to help it carry its equipment. It nodded, either too tired or too proud to speak. You all put his saddle on your mare together, and he walked back to the camp with you in the rain. This road is long and quiet. The only sounds were the wind, the leather brick, and the creaking of the snow. You passed by other riders, other small herds of cattle, all of whom marched in the same white world with the same cold determination. No one asked how it was going because everyone knew. When you finally see the white bunkhouse revealing its black shape, you have been on the saddle for 10 or 12 hours, although it feels shorter and longer than this. You help another cattle head to stabilize his equipment, and then take care of your own horse, massaging her as much as possible with numb hands to ensure she can reach the remaining hay. In the bunkhouse the same as this morning. Men gathered around the stove, whispering to each other or not speaking at all, sipping coffee with a metallic and smoky flavor. You stand among them, peeling off layer upon layer of frozen clothes. When your hands and feet regain sensation, the pain is abnormal. Just like being pricked by 1,000 needles, you breathe through it, grit your teeth, until it passes. Someone hands you a plate of cold and thick beans. You are eating with a spoon, and the spoon is jingling on the can. The beans were ground up by the sand because it was impossible to clean the cookware properly in such weather. But you still ate, because calories are the foundation of survival. The conversations around you are fragmented, about the lost cow, the injured horse, the heartless wind, and the half-hearted thoughts. No one complains directly because complaining will bring bad luck. That with every pause and every sigh, there is a complaint. You want to lie down and sleep, but you know that in a few hours, they'll have to go out for a night test again. So use it there, letting the warmth of the stove seep into your bones, and you stare at the frost forming inside the window. A slow and sad tune that sounds just like the wind itself. No one asked him to stop, but no one joined either. Close your eyes for a while. At that moment, you were somewhere else. A warm place. Find a place where breathing air doesn't hurt. Somewhere, you can recall how your hand felt before it was taken away by the cold. But, at this moment, someone said, "It's time to settle the bill in the evening." Then you open your eyes and put on the frozen coat. Outside, the wind is still howling, the snow is still falling, and the cattle are still dying in the endless white. You retreat into the storm because that's what you should do. You take a step back because another option is to let the entire herd die, so that you have a chance to be paid and continue this life, proving that you can tolerate the demands of the West. If possible, the night is darker than the day. In the storm, light has become a distant memory. You ride your bike, stretch your hands ahead looking for obstacles you can't see. The cattle are still curled up where you left them, or where you think you left them. It's hard to be sure when everything seems the same. You circled it again and counted it once more, knowing that the count would be less than this morning. Some people got lost, some lay down and could never get up again, and some simply vanished into the white as if they had never existed. Your horse moves beneath you like a ghost, making almost no sound. You want to know if she thinks the same as you. This situation cannot continue. One day the storm will break out. The meaning of existence is by no means limited to endless cold and loss. But the storm did not stop. The wind keeps blowing. You keep riding, because stopping means freezing, and freezing means transforming into another shape in the snow, waiting for others to discover it. Several hours passed, perhaps just a few minutes. You have lost the ability to distinguish. At some point, you realize that you were talking to yourself, or to your horse, or to the storm. These words are not important. This is just a sound, merely a proof that you are still alive and can still make a sound in the silent white world. When you finally returned to your bunk, you could hardly detect the lightning from the east in the sky. Dawn is approaching, which means you have survived another night and also means you can start all over again. Inside, you take off your clothes and hang them up to dry. However, under such humidity, nothing can be done. It has become less frozen. If you lie in bed without eating or talking, sleep will treat you as a predator. But even in your dreams, you dream of the cold, of the wind, and of shapes moving in the endless white. When you wake up, it's too early, always too early. The wind is still howling, the snow is still falling, and the work goes on as usual. Perhaps it will continue. This is the meaning of being a cowboy in a snowstorm. It's not glory nor adventure, but the simple yet terrifying fact that you silently crush everything you think you are yourself, until all that remains is your own patience. In the same winter, in the same vast expanse of white silence, there is a person shouldering a life heavier than his own. Charles Goodnight was born in Illinois 49 years ago. Standing by the window of his ranch, he watched as his life's work vanished under the snow. He came to the West in 1836, with nothing, or almost nothing, which makes no difference in the narrative. What he had was uneasy the belief that the frontier would reward those who were willing to endure its special cruelty. For decades, this belief has proved to be correct. He opened up roads in areas without roads, negotiated with the war parties of the Comanche, survived droughts and stampedes, and all the occasional violent incidents in the West. The Goodnight Road, named after him and his partner Oliver Lowen, once transferred tens of thousands of cattle from Texas to the railways in Wyoming and Colorado. It created wealth, created industry, and mapped out areas that were previously blank. But now, in January 1887, all of this lost its meaning. The blizzard that began a few weeks ago has been mercilessly continuing. Every day, Goodnight watches his flock of sheep, his legacy shrinking. His farm workers came in from the ranch with reports, all of which were variations on the same topic. More dead cows, more lost cows, more cows stood listlessly in the snow, waiting for death to come and find them. He listened to every report with the same expression, without any betrayal, because this was what the leaders here needed. But in the evening he was doing math alone in his study. Each dead cow not only means a loss of money, but also that years of work have gone to waste. The carefully cultivated animals have been destroyed, and the expansion plan will never occur. The storm has killed more cattle than it can bear and shows no sign of stopping. Other ranchers have withdrawn their people, cancelled their cattle herds and focused on protecting the lives of their own people. Good night. No, every morning, he and his men rode out on horseback, looking for cows that could still be saved and transferring them to any shelter provided by the land. But this was never enough. Every morning his wife Mary watched him leave. In her eyes, he saw a question she didn't ask. When will you be able to admit that this is a battle you can't win? He didn't know the answer, so he just put on his hat and rode into the white one. Those who work for him are all very loyal, but loyalty has its limits. They followed him into the storm, because he paid them their wages and because they respected what he had built. But he could see the growing suspicion in their eyes. One night, a young cowboy named Thompson came to him with a simple question. "Good night, sir. What are we doing outside?" This question hangs in the air like frost. Good night, everyone. Think carefully about his answer. He can talk about financial investment, about protecting what can be protected, about obligations and responsibilities. But what he said was, "Those cows are raised by us just as you earn your salary by me." This is not entirely correct. They all know this. Cows rely only on instinct. But the truth is what matters. Thompson nodded and didn't ask any more. The next morning he was back in the saddle and rode into the storm with the others. These days are intertwined, endlessly repeating the coldness and loss. Although the 49-year-old can feel this sensation every year in such weather, he can still sense his joints protesting against long periods of horseback riding, and the cold feels deeper into his bones than it did 20 years ago. He found that his cattle were either in herds or alone, some dead and some alive, scattered across the pasture like seeds sown by an angry god. He tried to transfer the living to shelters, although the term refuge in this open country is relative. He counted the deceased, and the numbers in his heart became more and more depressing day by day. Some people froze while standing with ice completely enveloping them. They looked like sculptures, monuments to their own suffering. Others huddled together for warmth and then died in piles, their bodies frozen into strange lines and horns. His men call these people who gathered together death drifts, a name that is very apt and has endured for a long time. One afternoon, Goodnight came across a herd of cattle. They discovered a small canyon that was almost windbreak. There stood there about 30 or 40 of them, with ice on their backs waiting. He got out of the car, walked among them, stroked the sides of their frozen bodies with his hands, looked into their eyes, and searched for signs of their vitality or compliance. Most people just stared at him with the same patient expression, as if they had accepted their fate and were just waiting for it to come. Among this group of people was a young bull, which was one of his breeding animals. This is a good animal with elegant lines and should be able to give birth to hundreds of calves. The bull's legs were trembling. The Goodnight knew he wouldn't make it through the next night. For a long time he considered shooting the bull to free it from its pain. For he stopped, his hand even reached for the rifle on the saddle. What stopped him was not kindness or hope, but something more complicated. Realizing that shooting a bull is equivalent to admitting that everything is over and no matter how hard one tries, it's meaningless. He isn't ready to admit it yet. Not yet. So he made the bull stand there, got back on his horse and rode away without looking back. That morning, the bull was dead and frozen in the place where Goodnight last saw it. Losses piled up like mountains, 50 heads, 100 heads, 200 heads. These figures have almost become abstract, too large to be understood as individual animals and individual deaths. Goodnight. He has an account book in his study, recording his losses and neatly writing each number in a column. The ink froze in the bottle all night, so every morning he had to heat it up by the fire before he could write. Mary told him not to keep a ledger anymore, as it would only make things worse. He needed to focus on what could be saved instead of mourning what had already been lost. Of course, she was right. But he still kept writing these numbers because stopping felt like giving them up for the second time. Other ranchers in the area are also experiencing similar losses. Goodnight hearing the report from the rider who occasionally passes through the storm. One land and cattle company lost more than 80% of its cattle. The equipment of Powder River is facing complete destruction. Some smaller businesses no longer exist. It's not just the death of the cattle. Men are also in great pain. Frostbite can cause fatigue in fingers and toes, leading to accidents. There was also a rumor that one morning the ox rider rode out and never came back. Their corpses still lay somewhere in the endless white. Good night. Let me know everyone who works for him. Remember their names and where they come from. When one of them doesn't come back from the shooting range, he will feel very personal. A cowboy named Sullivan went missing when the storm was particularly severe. Goodnight personally led the search and rescue team, traversing the snow for 3 days, and finally found Sullivan's body curled up on a frozen rock. They dug his grave on the ground as hard as iron. The funeral was brief as there was still work to be done, but Goodnight said a few words about responsibility and sacrifice. The men listened with their heads down. That night he wrote a letter to Sullivan's mother in Missouri, telling her that her son had sacrificed his life while doing an important job. He was brave and reliable, and he would be remembered. None of these are lies, but they feel like. Winter continues to attack mercilessly. Has become a habit that is almost ritualistic. Wake up before dawn, ride out as soon as it gets light, spend 12 hours in the saddle, return when it gets dark, eat without tasting, sleep without resting, and repeat this process. His hands, which once handled and imprinted with ease and grace, are now stiff and clumsy. He would drop things, tools and urine. This loss of dexterity bothered him even more than he admitted. Every night, Mary applied ointment to his hands, warmed them with her own hands, and made no comment on how much older they looked than they did at the beginning of winter. She doesn't need it. He can see it himself. One night, after experiencing an especially cruel day, where a single drift claimed the lives of 30 people, Goodnight sat in his study, giving himself a moment of honest assessment. The ranch might survive, but it won't be the same as before. The deer herd he had built up over decades either vanished or disappeared. The expansion plan has been completed. The dream of establishing a cattle farming empire passed down through generations was buried in the snow along with his helmsman. However, the next morning, he put on his frozen coat and rode out again. It's not because he thinks he can still win, but because surrender is not in his dictionary. His cowboys watched him ride ahead of them. This 50-year-old man should have been more sensible and cut his losses a few weeks ago. But they followed him not because they thought there was any point in doing so, but because that was loyalty. In late February, the storm finally broke out. The wind stopped, the snow stopped, and the sky turned so blue that it made people feel uncomfortable just looking at it. Good night, everyone. For the first time in weeks, his men were assessing the losses in broad daylight. What they discovered was a landscape that had been transformed into a cemetery. There are dead cows everywhere. In the valley, along the fence, scattered across the open pastures. In these places they tried to escape the cold. When the count was finally completed, it confirmed what the Goodnight already knew. It lost 60% of its elephant herd. For other ranchers, the losses are even more severe. 70%, 80%, 90%. Some people lose everything. This snowstorm, which will be remembered as the Great Death, reshaped the entire cattle farming industry in one winter. Under the spring sun, looking at the corpses that need to be cleared, the fences that need to be repaired, and the years of work that will take to rebuild what was destroyed by winter, what he felt was not anger or despair, but something calmer acceptance. Like most people, he believes that hard work and determination can overcome any obstacle. The snowstorm taught him another lesson. Nature is not an obstacle to overcome, but a force to endure. Sometimes the only victory is survival. His cattle are gone, But his pasture is still there, his people are still there, and he is still here. Ultimately, this is enough, because in the West, survival itself is a victory, and Charles Goodnight was the most important survivor. A few years after the heavy snowfall, when the border was closed and the cowboy age became a myth, archaeologists walking on the high plains of the Dakota region discovered something rather unreasonable. These are the ghostly fires. Charred stones and blackened land form patterns throughout the landscape, just like ancient messages written in ashes. At that time, the frontier had become a memory, softer and more strange than when people lived there. The open pastures were fenced off, the bison vanished, and railways connected the continent with iron wires. Most of the cowboys themselves vanished, being absorbed by the cities or settled on small plots of land, which seemed impossible to be restricted after the vast lands they were once familiar with. Their story has begun the process of mythologization, filtered through cheap novels and Wild West TV series, until the truth and fiction become indistinguishable. But this land remembers what stories cannot capture. It preserves evidence of what actually happened in the soil and stones, waiting for those trained eyes to read these things. The first batch was discovered by chance in 1934, when a drought lowered the topsoil, revealing something hidden. A graduate student from the University of Montana was drawing a map of the cemetery when he happened to discover a perfect circle composed of blackened stones by fire, which were arranged very precisely. Her name was Sarah Whitmore. She spent 3 weeks alone on the plain, documenting the ruins that were gradually disappearing due to agriculture and erosion. Her work is methodical, trained to observe without explanation, and collect data without imposing narratives. But this circle stopped her from moving forward. These stones are placed deliberately. Their spacing is irregular and their arrangement is purposeful and unnatural. She recorded this in her field journal. Make a sketch and continue with her original work. But that night she was camping on the plain. Under the seemingly bright stars, she couldn't stop thinking about those stones, thinking that their arrangement was intentional. The grassland at night is not as quiet as people imagine. It whispers to the wind, clicks with insects and rustles with little creatures passing through the grass. Whitmore lay in her tent, listening to these sounds, thinking of the hands that would release those stones. She thought of fire and darkness, and the reason why people need to mark their existence in this permanent way. In the following weeks, she discovered more circles, totaling 7, all within a radius of 30 meters, with similar diameters and all facing southeast. She carefully measured each one, took pictures from multiple angles, and collected samples of the charred substances she found in some of them. The consistency of the patterns fascinated her the most. This is not random, not accidental, and not the result of a natural process. This pattern is too consistent to be accidental and too widespread to be the masterpiece of a single camp. She wrote to her professor to describe her discovery and asked him if he knew of any Indian traditions that could explain these fire rings. She includes her sketches and measurements, and notes on the southeast direction, and her different observations on the growth patterns of the grass inside and around the circle. She tried to keep her tone neutral and academic, but her formal language was filled with excitement. His answer was confusing. The Lakota people use fire in their rituals, yes, but not in this way. Moreover, the charcoal on the stone seems to be recent, from several decades rather than centuries. He believed that these might be the remnants of the surveyor's camp or the marks left by railway scouts, or even carefully designed scams. But none of these explanations are in line with the evidence. The professor suggested that she contact her colleagues working at other locations in the northern plain to see if there were similar stratigraphic records elsewhere. This kind of communication will take months, slowly crossing the distance she is studying through letters. But Whitmore was very patient and organized. She increasingly believed that her discovery was important to her, but she still couldn't explain it clearly. She extended the camping season in the wild to early autumn to look for more circles. The mystery deepened when other archaeologists working in different areas of the northern plain began to discover similar structures. In 1940, more than 200 ghost fires had been recorded in Montana, Wyoming and Dakota. The term ghost fire emerged organically from the archaeological community. It is a poetic label referring to something that is difficult to classify more scientifically. Some scholars oppose the romanticism of this name. They prefer neutral descriptions, such as the structure of the stone circle or historical relics. But perhaps the reason why this label is so firm is that it captures some of the essence of these places. It seems that they are not haunted by ghosts, but rather due to a lack of explanation. They are evidence of existence, having turned into a loss of heat, having cooled into memory. Their diameters range from 6 feet to 12 feet, but southeast orientation is almost common. In some places there are hidden artifacts, rusty horseshoes, canvas fragments, and melted glass which might have once been the fixtures for bottles or lanterns. A research team from the University of Wyoming meticulously classified these artifacts, noting the types of metals used, manufacturing styles, and possible production dates. These items tell the story of life on the border, its tools and necessities, as well as the mundane reality beneath the surface of myths. Coffee cans can be found in several locations. Their labels have long since faded, but their shapes are still recognizable. Buttons are made of bones or horns, the kind used to fasten wool coats to keep them warm. After trekking for miles on stones and hard ground, the fragments of the horseshoe were worn thin. These are all fragments of work and life, not the grand adventures in frontier myths. There is a particularly memorable discovery at a site in South Dakota, a circle of stones with a cavalry fawn buried in the middle. This metal is severely corroded and breaks at the slightest touch. The date on the coin beside indicates that it was around 1886 or 1887. The spurs are a military issue. Despite being corroded, their unique line-up pattern can be identified, but there are no other military equipment nearby. There were no buttons, no QQ, and no badges that might show soldiers' graves. This coin is a silver dollar minted in 1885. Before being buried, its surface became smooth due to transportation. No one can say for sure whether it was deliberately placed as a sacrifice or lost in a desperate struggle. This time coincided exactly with the mass extinction, and a theory began to emerge. These were the last batch of cowboy camps that died in the snowstorm. These circles mark where people light the last fire, where they collect stones to store the little heat they can generate, and where they arrange themselves to face the sunrise they hope for. The winter of 1886-1887 had a disastrous impact on the northern plains, with millions of cattle dying and bringing an end to the era of open pastures. The man also died in the storm that lasted for several days. The temperature dropped to -40 degrees. The wind makes one feel as if breathing is drowning. The historical records contain a glimpse of this disaster. Newspaper reports, ranch ledgers show the devastating losses, and occasional diary entries mention frozen cattle piled up like firewood. However, labor costs are difficult to quantify, especially for those cowboys who leave almost no written records of their lives. Many people vanished like that in that winter, and no one knew their fate. Some people were found several months later when the snow melted. Their bodies were preserved by the cold and still leaned straight against the trees or rock strata where they sought refuge. But if this theory is correct, the problem still exists. Why are so many circles of the same size and direction? Why have some places where livestock cannot be raised been found in barren areas, which indicates that they are not herders' camps at all? In the 1882, ranchers and subsequent government surveyors all made detailed records of grazing routes and drew maps. However, in some places where no wise driver would take a group of people, several ghost fire scenes have appeared several miles away from any established route. This geographical anomaly has been bothering researchers. If the fire indicates a death camp caused by a snowstorm, they should gather along the known tree routes near the water source, where there might be cattle grazing. On the contrary, some appear in the most desolate places you can imagine, such as plateaus without shelters, alkaline lands without plant growth, and rocky wastelands that neither provide fuel nor protection. This distribution indicates that they were either wandering around randomly during the storm or were completely for other purposes. A retired rancher named William Haskell gave a different explanation in an interview in 1941. In the snowstorm of 1986, his father rode a horse with Charles Goodnight, and he remembered the old man talking about signal fire. Haskell was already 93 years old when the interview took place. He remembers very clearly what happened in his youth, but he can't remember exactly what happened in the recent decades. He spoke slowly and carefully, describing a conversation that took place over 50 years ago. Charles Goodnight was already a legend at that time. He was a cattle breeder who had helped open up roads to the markets of Texas and Colorado. If the riders of Goodnight used signal fire in snowstorm, this news will soon spread in the cowboy community. According to Haskell, cowboys caught in a storm would light fires in a specific pattern to show that they survived the night. The southeast direction has neither religious significance nor symbolic meaning. It is very practical and is designed to catch the first ray of dawn so that other passengers can detect the smoke. In the winter of the northern latitudes, dawn rises in the southeast, and the angle at which the sun rises can illuminate the smoke several miles away. Lighting a fire in that direction can announce to all those watching that they are still alive, and it can also serve as a lighthouse for those who are scattered and trying to regroup. These stones are arranged in a circle, not for a ritual but for efficiency, forming a windbreak that can keep the fire alive even in the most severe storms. The same size is not supernatural. This is just the diameter that people have learned from experience, which can provide the greatest warmth without consuming too much fuel. A 6-foot circle can accommodate 2 to 3 people lying close to the fire, close enough to share the heat, but not too close to avoid getting burned during their tired sleep. A 12-foot all one can accommodate more people. Maybe when a storm comes, the entire queue will be crowded together. If the stone is too small, it will radiate intense heat into the interior, preventing it from resting. A fire that is too big will not heat up fully, and the burning fuel does not provide sufficient protection against the cold. This is a practical explanation that satisfies those scholars who like to solve puzzles with logic, but it cannot explain everything. The theory of signal fire in survival camps provides a framework, a way to understand most of what archaeologists have discovered. The interview with the university as a website Haskell incorporated cowboy pragmatism into their interpretation of evidence, but exceptional cases keep emerging. Abnormal phenomena that do not quite conform to the pattern and resist the comfortable narrative that integrates into actual survival. Some circles contain things that have no practical use. A pattern of small stones arranged in a large circle, coins placed at specific intervals, not the bones of cows or horses, the bones of smaller animals such as coyotes, marmots, and rabbits. Their arrangement has a clear purpose. At a site in eastern Montana, excavators discovered a perfect white pebble spiral in a larger stone circle. Not native stones from the neighboring areas. Some people deliberately collected them, brought them to this place, and spent time and energy arranging them into a pattern. This occurred during a snowstorm that was severe enough to kill tens of thousands of cattle. However, someone found the time and energy to arrange this matter. In Wyoming, a circle contains 13 coins, which are placed at regular intervals along its inner circumference. Each coin faces up and is engraved with a different date. The date span ranges from 1807 to 1896, as if each coin represents a year, as if this arrangement marks the passage of time or commemorates events known only to those who placed them. The bones of animals are even stranger. They may appear in 1 out of every 10 circles. They are always small mammals, always arranged in some carefully planned way, crossing each other at right angles, radiating outward from a central point, placed parallel like the steps of a ladder. A folklorist named Alan Morris was extremely fascinated by these anomalies. In the 1952, she spent 3 summers camping on the plain, interviewing elderly farmers and their descendants, and collecting stories passed down from generation to generation. Morris was trained as an anthropologist but works on the fringes of academia and is more interested in life experience than statistical analysis. She always carried a tape recorder with her and recorded conversations with a voice that would disappear within 10 years. The farmers trusted her for more than they trusted the university archaeologists. Perhaps it is because she has no theory she wants to prove. She just listened, sipping coffee at the kitchen table and sitting on the porch steps on long summer nights listening to the old men talk. What she discovered was a subtle cultural fusion, a quiet exchange between the cowboys who toiled on this land and the indigenous people who had lived there for centuries. Despite their reputation as conquerors, cowboys absorbed more than they migrated. History books emphasize conflicts. During the Indian War, they slaughtered bison and were forced to move to reservations. There is no denying that all of this is a tragedy. But at the same time as the violent incident occurred, other things also happened. Cowboys and locals worked together on the ranch, sharing campsites and water sources, and exchanging knowledge on how to survive without any preparation. The skills that cowboys rely on for survival, such as interpreting weather signals, finding water sources in droughts, and navigating based on stars and terrain, have all been refined by generations of plain tribes. The smart cowboys learned these skills, absorbed them and turned them into their own. Several of her informants mentioned the snow spirit, an entity said to follow the traveler under white conditions. These ghosts may not be malicious, but they disinfect people, take them away from safe zones, and distort familiar landmarks beyond recognition. The Lakota people gave names to these souls, had complex beliefs about their nature and purpose, and designed rituals to prevent their influence. But this concept transcended tribal boundaries and was simplified and transformed by the cowboys, who only knew that there were dangerous things in the snowstorm. An old farmer told Morris that his grandfather had got lost in a storm and heard voices calling him from different directions. Grandfather somehow knew that following those sounds meant death, so he completely stopped moving and started a fire on the spot. To resist the snow spirits, you need to create a sacred space. The fire ring provides this kind of protection, but only if it is built correctly. Facing the southeast direction of the sun's rebirth, place stones that match the visible constellations above at regular intervals to offer sacrifices to the deities in the form of food, tobacco, or coins. This is where actual survival and ritual practice cannot be separated. It's true that lighting towards the southeast of the fire is better, but it also symbolizes renewal and the return of warmth. The placed stones reflect star-shaped patterns, forming an effective windbreak forest. Yes, but they also pray for the protection of heaven to bind the earth's space with the cosmic order. Coins dedicated to deities can also serve as a symbol of human rescuers. They're glittering objects that can attract light and attention. Morris recorded the stories of dozens of cowboys who survived the snowstorm through these semi-magical practices. These people swore that they heard the sound of the wind pointing them in. They found refuge in a place where they shouldn't have existed, and they felt their horses guiding them, even though the animals were already dead. A man named Caleb Jensen told her that he saw his dead horse walking ahead of him in the snow, leading him to a cave he had never noticed before, even though he had ridden it for 3 years. He followed the ghost and survived for 2 days before the storm hit. Another informant described the process of him making the fire. He thought he was asleep, but it might be something else. In this state, he saw someone moving around his fire. Those people he didn't know but seemed familiar to him were refueling the flame when he was resting. When he woke up, his fire was still burning vigorously. His pile of firewood was getting less and less, but he didn't remember ever getting up to collect it. He found footprints in the snow around his circle, but they disappeared after a few yards. In 1962, she published her discovery under the title Ghost Fire Cowboy Cosmology on the Northern Plains. The academic community basically regards it as a folktale, interesting but ultimately unscientific. These comments were polite yet skeptical, praising Morris's thoroughness while questioning her approach. How can oral history collected decades after an event be regarded as reliable evidence? Critics admit that these stories are fascinating, but they fail to prove exactly what happened during the snowstorm. Human memory is unreliable and prone to modification and correction, especially when dealing with repeated traumatic experiences. But after the farmers read it, they nodded and recounted their experiences, but they weren't ever fully explained. Once, A grandfather rode through a snowstorm, following behind what he swore was a wolf, only to find himself standing at the door of his barn. The sales of this book are not high, but the pyramid scheme in the rural areas of the West is very stable. The farmers kept copies in the kitchen and marked the paragraphs to remind them of the stories told by their grandparents. After reading this book, the young man felt that his understanding of the past had changed somewhat and realized that history might be stranger and more complex than what was described in textbooks. The cowboys depicted by Morris are not ordinary people doing simple jobs, but rather individuals traveling through multiple worlds, practical and spiritual, scientific and magical, personal and collective. Some places on the mountains always feel different. Somehow it's colder, even in summer. In fact, cows will avoid specific areas for no obvious reason, circling around invisible boundaries that seem to be meaningful only to them. These observations accumulated over many years on the ranch and became part of unofficial knowledge, passed down from generation to generation. You can't herd cattle in a specific drawer, not because something particularly bad has happened there, but because they can't settle down in those places. Sometimes horses refuse to cross specific sections of the road. They swell up and snort as if they sense some threat. Dogs bark in open areas, raise their manes and respond to stimuli that are invisible to human senses. Modern archaeology has become more complex, using ground miners penetrating radar and carbon dating to analyze ghost fires with scientific precision. What they confirmed was both ordinary and mysterious. The fire can be traced back to the 1880 seconds. They were built by humans and they have some purposes related to survival. This technology reveals the invisible layers of surface detection. Under some of the circles are older fire sites, indicating that these locations have been repeatedly used and they have marked places with special advantages during storms. Carbon dating has confirmed that most fires burn hot and fast, which is in line with people's desperate efforts to stay warm, rather than the slow and continuous burning like leisure camping. The chemical composition of the ash indicates that it is mainly composed of sage and cottonwood, anything that can be quickly collected. Ground miners penetrating radar shows that some circles are located at the top of smaller geological anomalies. Underground water flows, mineral deposits and caves in limestone may offer a bit of wind protection. Perhaps the selection of these locations is based on an unconscious awareness of these features, an intuition about locations that precedes scientific understanding. But purpose and meaning are not the same thing. The fire born for warmth is also the fire born for hope. My declaration against darkness: I'm still here. I haven't given up. I'll wait until dawn. Every fire is the simultaneous occurrence of multiple things. It is chemistry and symbolism, physics and prayer. That cowboy was picking up stones with his frozen hands and was carrying out a practical mission. Yes, but he is also interpreting some ancient things. Human impulses to mark territory, demand space and establish order in chaos. The arrangement of these stones transformed the chaotic land into a meaningful place. In this sense, the ghost fire is not mysterious at all. They are merely evidence of what people do when pushed to the limit. They create rituals. They established order amid chaos. They built small monuments for their endurance. This impulse exists in all cultures and all eras. The climbers left cans on the top of the mountain. The traveler carved the initials on the tree. A dying person will leave a message for anyone who might come. These actions indicate, I'm here. I am important, even if it is only for a short while. Take a look at what I have done on Earth. If you know where to go, you can visit some of these websites right now. They are marked on the Archaeological Survey map, protected by the National Historical Society, and gradually cultivated by the grassland grass. Access requires permission and sometimes a fee. These sites are managed just like historical resources. The small signs explain what the visitors see, provide the background and date, and offer explanations. But these signs fail to capture the feeling of standing within these circles and not convey the sense of presence of lingering in these places. Milestones provide something completely different, inviting people to imagine and feel the passage of time. Standing in one of the circles, especially at dawn when the sunlight shines from the southeast, You can almost sense the presence of the people who used to stand here. To be precise, it's not a ghost but an echo. This is the stubborn remnant of humanity in the face of destruction. The light at dawn on the plain is different from that anywhere else. It is thin and cold, yet extremely clear, showing the vast distance with ruthless precision. Standing in the circle of ghostly flames at dawn is to precisely see what the cowboys see and share the direction of the rising sun. The stone is still hot, although this is impossible. The grass here grows differently, sparse and short, as if the earth remembers it. Tourists reached out their hands to touch the palms of the stones, touching the cold rocks. Some said they felt the residual heat. These fires could not have been extinguished more than a century ago. However, this feeling persists and is reported so frequently that it has become part of the website's unofficial law. Some tourists said that they felt they were being stared at, or when they turned around there was nothing but the vast grassland that stretched all the way to the horizon. Others felt a kind of inexplicable sadness, a burden weighing on them like snow. The feeling of being watched is very common, so when tourists bring up this matter, the forest rangers no longer find it strange. Perhaps this is merely the awareness that the boundary between the self and the landscape has vanished when standing in a vast open space. Some echoes of concern still exist. The people sitting in these circles focus their attention on the horizon in search of rescue, weather changes, and any signs that their situation might improve. Night after night of vigilance may leave an impression. In 2003, a woman visited a ghost fire site in Wyoming. Later, she wrote in her visitor journal, "I sat in the circle for an hour, had nothing and saw nothing, but I felt understood." This phrase is mysterious, but perhaps it is suitable for places that exist between history and mystery. The visitor log contains hundreds of similar entries. People try to express their experiences of resisting language. Something happened here. I feel connected to something whose name I can't name. This place knows more than me, more than me. Some entries are poems. There are also some that are just simple lists of emotions. Unease. Some visitors were drawing in the margins, sketching the circles themselves, depicting sunrises, and drawing figures. These figures might be people or abstract expressions of emotions. Archaeologists continue their work, documenting and theorizing, building databases, and publishing papers. They drew a distribution map of the ghost fire, analyzed the hidden items, and searched for patterns that might reveal the ultimate truth. Every summer there are new excavations and new data points to increase the accumulated knowledge. The graduate students spent several months on the plain continuing the work. The Sarah Whitmore began in 1930 for these issues had become more complex, integrating insights from multiple disciplines, including tomatology, psychology, cultural anthropology, materials science, and science. But the most fundamental mystery still exists. What exactly are these places? What do they mean to the people who built them? But perhaps some truth should not be revealed. Perhaps the most valuable aspect of the ghost fire is that it serves as a question rather than an answer, as a reminder that history is not merely about what happened, but about how you felt when it was there. The impulse of academia is to pursue solutions, explanations and encompassed theories. However, some phenomena resist such treatment, stubbornly maintaining multiple interpretations and refusing a single explanation. Ghost fire can be signal fire and sacred places, survival camps and ritual spaces, actual reactions and magical thoughts. They simultaneously encompass all these possibilities. Perhaps simplifying them to any single explanation would undermine their actual existence. In peaceful moments when the wind blows across the plain and makes the grass whisper, you can imagine those cowboys who light these fires. We don't know their names, their faces are not in the photos, and their graves are unmarked, missing or never dug up. Most of them are very young, although people in the frontier age very quickly. A boy just over a teenager engages in work that requires continuous physical strength and courage, endures deadly weather, and deals with animals that might crush, kick, or trample on them. They came from all over the world, Texas and Tennessee, Ireland and Sweden, liberated slaves from the South, and immigrants seeking jobs in the New World. The border is highly democratic in danger, killing both the rich and the poor with the same efficiency. They picked up stones from the frozen ground and sorted them out with their half-frozen hands. They sparked in the wind, igniting flames from the wood that didn't want to burn. Just imagine how difficult this simple task is under the conditions of a snowstorm. My fingers are too cold to hold steadily. The spark was blown away by the wind as soon as it appeared. Snow that melts into water moistens the fuel. In this case, every time a fire is made, it is a small victory over a huge difficulty. This achievement is not remarkable. No one can write a song that successfully ignites fire. But it represents the difference between life and death, whether to give up or hold on for another hour. They sat all night fueling the flame and staying awake, because sleeping might mean never waking up. They gazed at the sky, looking for any sign that a storm might be approaching. When dawn finally came, if it really did, they would stand there, their whole bodies being stepped on, feeling their legs regain sensation and continue to survive. Some people sit alone, isolated from their clothes due to bad circumstances or luck. They talk to themselves or chat with friends who are not around. If they believe, they can also talk to God. The others huddled together, sharing warmth, taking turns to sleep, and keeping watch over each other in the darkest moments. The fire they made lived longer than they did. The stones they arranged still retained their ancient heat, or at least their memory. Stone is a patient information holder. It possesses the chemical characteristics of burned substances. It retains the manual arrangement of humans, leaving traces on the landscape and persisting in the subsequent years. Now, more than a century has passed, and we have discovered these circles, wondering what they mean. We wonder if the people who built them ever thought about being remembered, or if they just wanted to stay up one more night. During this long period of time, they might have thought about many things, thinking about the home they left behind, thinking about the people they would mourn if they died, thinking about outstanding debts and unfulfilled promises. They thought of getting warm again, of the arrival of spring, of whiskey, steaming hot food and clean bed sheets. They thought of their horses and hoped that the animals had found a place to live, although they knew they might not have found one yet. The answer to this question, like many questions about the ghost fire, has been lingering between knowing and not knowing. These circles exist undeniably, strangely, scattered across the high plains, just like a language that we can almost understand but cannot fully translate. Language requires a shared context, agreed meanings and a cultural framework for interpretation. Due to the gap between time, experience and description, we lack this connection with the person who made the fire. They talked about the cold and the fire, about isolation and patience, about the traces left by humanity on the hostile land. They talked about despair and determination, actual survival intertwined with something that might be magic or perhaps just hope. Hope itself is a kind of magic. Refuse to accept failure without a logical basis. The cowboys who lit these fires had almost no hope. There are no signs of the weather getting worse, there is a shortage of fuel, and it is unlikely to get help in a distant place. However, they still made a fire and carefully placed the stones, pointing everything towards the dawn they might never see. In the face of overwhelming difficulties, such persistence deserves recognition. They remind us that history is not merely recorded in documents and dates, but is written on the land in the patterns we are still learning to read. The ghost fire has become history, but it remains mysterious. Perhaps both should be retained. Official history, through ranch records and newspaper reports, through economic data regarding the loss of cattle and the end of open ranches, tells us about the Great Death. These materials are very important and the recorded content is also very accurate. But they miss personal experiences, those little stories about survival and death. Those moments when men decide whether they can live or not. The ghost fire preserves these moments in a form that is not easily consumed, a form that requires the imagination and empathy of those who understand them. Because some things are more powerful when they are refused to be fully explained, when they leave room for explanation and surprise. The cowboys who survived the snowstorm neither wrote memoirs nor gave interviews. They just pulled through and continued their work. The literacy rate of working cowboys varies greatly. Those who can write often do not think their experiences are worth recording. This is their life, an ordinary daily life, nothing special, even in extremely difficult and dangerous times. The silence they left behind has frustrated historians, but perhaps it is appropriate for those who value actions more than words, and measure themselves by what they can do rather than what they can say. Their eloquence lies in their actions, in their survival, and in the marks they leave on the land. The flame they lit was their will, more persuasive than words. Stones, ashes, and arrangements, simple elements combined with intentions, create something that can persist for a long time even after the flame cools down. These circles speak in a language older than writing, a language that humans use to mark and express meaning, predating letters and grammar. They are prehistoric in method and historical in date, linking the cowboys who built them to the profound past of human symbolic behavior. Therefore, the ghost fires are still scattered across the high plains, being painted, studied, and protected. Tourists come here, stand in the circle, and feel everything that these places evoke. The grass grows through the stones, patiently and slowly, gradually reclaiming the land that humans briefly marked as theirs. In another century, perhaps these circles will disappear again, being absorbed by the grasslands and waiting for the next drought to discover them. But now they are enduring these stubborn little monuments of humanity. These decorations indicate that there were once people in this place who refused to surrender to the cold and darkness. They collected stones, made a fire, and waited for dawn. This kind of waiting behavior without any reason is what the ghost fire ultimately commemorates. It's not the cowboys themselves, not their personal stories or specific identities, but a larger human story about patience and hope. They remind us that when survival seems impossible, people can survive. What can they create when creation seems meaningless? A stone circle arranged with frozen hands. The fire blazed fiercely on an impossible night, towards the direction of light that may never come. This is the testimony of the ghost fire, written in the most enduring language, the language of the landscape itself, the language of stones and soil, the meticulous arrangement, the simple elements, are all static to anyone willing to stand within these circles and listen. While cowboys freeze on the open pastures and thousands of cows lie in the snowdrifts, a different version of the Wild West is unfolding 300 meters south of Dodge City. Here, behind thick walls and frosted glass, barons who raise cattle are having dinner. The restaurant of Dodge Hotel was brightly lit and warm. The chandeliers imported from Chicago cast soft light onto the white tablecloths, polished silverware, and plates of roast beef, which somehow managed to escape the blizzard. The crystal pendants hanging from the chandelier captured the light and scattered it throughout the room, creating tiny rainbows. Each fixture was transported by train from the industrial workshop in the east and carefully wrapped in straw and burlap to ensure it was not damaged. The compensation amount exceeded the annual salary of a cowboy. The insurance documents themselves represent a belief in the system, a belief that losses can be calculated and transferred. In its offices in Hartford and Boston, Best Buy evaluated the risks of transporting fragile luxury goods over 2,000 miles of rugged land. The men gathered here wore dressed in wool-tailored suits instead of windbreakers. They exuded the smell of laurel rum rather than horse sweat. They speak in cautious investment language and respond with a measured tone that they are accustomed to being heard without raising their voices. They own the dying cattle in the north, but in such a distant place. Ownership is an abstract concept, a number on the ledger, not a suffering animal. This physical separation turns living beings into numbers, into assets that can be discussed at dinner without affecting one's appetite. Their suits were tailored by tailors in Chicago, St. Louis, and even New York. These people understand the particular vanity of Western wealth. The fabric is wool produced in a factory in Massachusetts, and the dyed color shows an unassuming prosperity. Charcoal color, navy blue, and occasionally with understated fine stripes. Each set of clothes requires dozens of hours of skilled labor, including measuring and adjusting the size, and arranging fitting times according to the convenience of the customer. The tailor meticulously recorded each customer's preferences, the exact slope of their shoulders, and the precise length of their arms. The buttons are mother of pearl, the lining is silk, and the stitching is extremely fine, as if it had vanished into the fabric. These garments are designed to be durable and remain and change along with the evolution of fashion or physical changes. James Patterson, the head of Swan Ranch and Cattle Company, was sitting in the main seat at the largest table. His company eventually suffered a loss of 85%. But tonight, these figures remain speculations of assumptions. Patterson wore a California gold watch chain on his vest. When he walked, it emitted a casual light, like a chandelier above. His hands were smooth and free of calluses. They were those of a person signing documents rather than holding a gun. The watch itself is a precision gear made by Waltham in Massachusetts, and the time is within a few seconds every day. It cost a cowboy more than 3 months' salary. Patterson often checked it, as if the evening entertainment activities were carried out according to a schedule that had to be followed. He raised his whiskey glass and drank imported Kentucky bourbon, not the rotten kind sold in the small-town tavern. He proposed a toast to his recovery and revival. Others joined him as well, and the crystals jingled in the warm air filled with cigars and the scent of prosperity. The sound of the glasses clashing together was delicate and refined, not at all like the heavy clashing of tin cups among the stones. These are Watford's crystal stems. Each one is more valuable than a saddle. When transported to the West, they were handled with the same care as they were for valuable goods. Whiskey itself is a special reserve, aged for 12 years in charred oak barrels, and each bottle is hand-minus labeled and numbered. This distillery located in Kentucky has been producing this special bourbon whiskey since before the Civil War and has refined the recipe through generations of meticulous experiments. In the kitchen, the staff were working on coal-burning stoves, which had been burning during the storm. The kitchen was so hot that it was almost suffocating. The chefs and waiters, just like those who were usually won, got through the high temperature with ease. They couldn't imagine what it was like to be so cold that it couldn't be remedied. There are 3 large stoves in the kitchen. Their cast iron bodies give off heat. Even when a snowstorm is raging outside, the room still has a tropical feeling. Coal was transported in tons from the mines in Pennsylvania and stored in boxes at the back of the hotel, sufficient to deal with any possible winter emergencies. This coal was transported away by train. It took dozens of workers several weeks to do so, and their names did not appear in the hotel's accounts. Each piece represents an ancient forest that has been compressed for millions of years, now burning to provide warmth for a building throughout the season. The head chef, Hammond Schultz, is a German immigrant who directs the staff with the precision of an officer. He once worked in hotel kitchens from Baltimore to San Francisco and brought a whole set of technologies to Dodge City. For a small town that raised cattle, the complexity of these technologies was almost absurd. Schultz once worked as an apprentice in his father's restaurant in Hamburg, learning traditional French cooking techniques from chefs trained in Paris. He can cut a piece of beef as precisely as a surgeon, knows 7 ways to cook potatoes, and can also identify herbs by smell in a dark room. His employees were both afraid of him and respected him. When he roared to give orders in accented English, they would jump up and stand at attention. He wouldn't allow waste, shortcuts, or compromises in the kitchen, treating every meal as if it were prepared for the royal family. The beef on the plates in the restaurant was all slaughtered before the snowstorm hit. It is very tender, with fine marbling. It was prepared by a chef using French techniques. He was attracted to venture to the West and earned a higher salary than he did in New York. Schultz roasted beef with garlic and oats, spread butter imported from Iowa on it, and cut it into portions enough for a cowboy to eat for 3 days. The seasonings for the meat are potatoes, Dufino, green beans, amygdalin and an alcoholic sauce, the ingredients of which cannot be found within 500 miles of Kansas. The potatoes were sliced as thin as paper with a mandolin knife that afternoon and sprinkled with cream and cheese brought from Chicago. These mung beans were delivered a week ago and were the last batch of goods before the storm ended. Railway line. Just the sauce alone requires an hour of meticulous care. Reduce the wine by half, add scallions and herbs, and finally add bone marrow and butter. This is a kind of preparatory work that requires constant vigilance. The temperature is adjusted by degree and the time is calibrated by second. During the break, the topic turned to the weather. Several people received telegrams from the ranch manager. It was reported that the losses were heavy and the conditions were harsh. The telegram arrived throughout the afternoon, delivered by a boy who trudged from the Western Union office through kneeing and steep snow. Each piece of information represents a crisis taking place hundreds of miles away, translated into expensive text and transmitted along copper wires at the speed of electricity. Addison read aloud part of a telegram. Heard it. Dispersed. Heavy death. People exhausted. Hearing these words, everyone nodded solemnly, expressing appropriate concern, and then the conversation shifted to other topics. The cost of sending this telegram is $3, which is equivalent to the wages of the people described in the telegram to 3 days. Its simplicity is not only a choice of style but also an economic need. Every word is a waste of money, which could have been spent on supplies or wages. The Western Union operator who copied this message has been working during the storm, maintaining the connection between the isolated ranch and the business center. He typed out dots and strokes with consummate efficiency, never knowing the content of most information, nearly transforming human crises into electrical pulses, riding north to offer help. No one thought that their appearance at the shooting range might boost morale or improve performance. This suggestion would be regarded as absurd, as it confuses the categories of managers and laborers. These people certainly have horses, but they hadn't ridden saddles in harsh conditions for several years, perhaps even decades. The cycling experiences include leisurely afternoon hikes on neat trails or carefully arranged enclosures at a safe distance for observation. The horses they raised were all for showing off their appearance rather than endurance. They were kept in heated stables and had to be combed and washed every day. This is not cold-heartedness, but a clear understanding of the character. The men in the restaurant provide funds and direction, while those on the ranch offer labor and endurance. The reason why the system works is that each group stays in the designated place. Blurring these boundaries would threaten the entire structure, which means that non-existent ownership is to some extent illegal. It is best to maintain the illusion that management and labor are different fields that require different skills. And a person who can understand the balance sheet should not be expected to ride in a snowstorm. Through education and through the different worlds in which these people grew up, this division was strengthened. These noblemen who raised cattle had all attended university or served in the military, studied accounting and law, and received training to hold important positions. Cowboys started their childhood by doing rough work on the ranch and learned skills through apprenticeships and the needs of life. There is no formal education to prepare them for their careers. It is just that the accumulated wisdom is passed from the experienced to the novices. After dinner, they returned to the living room of the hotel, where there was a large enough stone fireplace to stand on, and the stove was on fire. The heat it generates is almost aggressive, the kind that makes you drowsy yet satisfied. The fireplace was built with limestone mined from the cliffs along the Arkansas River. Each stone is cut and inlaid by a mason who understands that eternity is a kind of wealth. The fire consumed the split oak logs transported from Missouri, and each rope represented the days of labor of people whose names the diners would never know. The limestone was shaped by an Italian stonemason who brought it to Kansas specifically for this project. A person who processes stones as a sculptor processes marble. They spent 3 weeks on the fireplace, choosing the size and shape of each stone and assembling them precisely together to the extent that the mortar was almost unnecessary. The chairs sitting around the fireplace were added with leather and horsehair, manufactured in Grand Rapids and then transported to the West piece by piece. These pieces of furniture were assembled by a furniture craftsman who spent 6 months in Dodge City and earned commissions for the hotel before moving to Denver. The tanning process of this kind of leather has developed for several centuries and has been treated with oil to keep it often give off a strong smell. Horsehair fillers offer firmness without rigidity and can maintain their shape over decades of use. Each chair is a little masterpiece of joinery and interior decoration. The wooden frames without nails are joined together by precisely cut mortise and tenon joints. The craftsman who built them learned this craft during his 7-year apprenticeship. He can distinguish different woods by feeling in the dark. At night, a pianist hired performed excerpts from popular songs and light operas. When he played Home in the Pasture, several people joined in singing about the clear sky all day long, singing about the rarely heard depressing words, singing about the sweetness of life on the frontier. The piano itself was a Steinway grand piano, transported across the plain by a specially built carriage equipped with suspension devices to protect its exquisite internal structure. It needs to be adjusted after each significant temperature change. This service is provided by a professional sound engineer who visits monthly from Kansas City. This musical instrument cost $4,000, which is more than what most cowboys earn through their careers. Its strings are made of steel twisted by hand and calibrated for precise tension. A hammer is covered with compressed felt and strikes the strings with controlled force. None of them could detect the irony in it, but irony is a luxury of comfort. They can sing in this range while sitting in an armchair because they haven't been in that range yet and haven't been testing its authenticity on myth. The Western scene depicted in the lyrics bears little resemblance to what their employees were experiencing at that time. There is no mention of the snow cutting like broken glass, no mention of the frozen cattle standing there, and no mention of the people who lost their fingers and toes to save the cattle that would die no matter what. This song was written by a doctor who had briefly resided in Kansas before returning to the East and composed some verses based on his limited exposure to life at the border. It captures romance, neglects reality, beauty, and at the same time excludes cruelty. Outside, the same snowstorm killed their investment and continued to make a difference. Snow was piled up on the hotel windows, but the windows were double-minus glazed, the walls were thick and the coal boxes were full. Snow forms abstract patterns on the glass, beautiful in its unique way, transforming the fierce chaos of the storm into aesthetics. Inside, men would occasionally stop to admire these patterns, as if they were appreciating a dramatic painting, commenting on the bad weather with a detached attitude. Double-minus glazed windows represent the latest innovation. Two pieces of glass are separated by an air gap, providing remarkable insulation. They were installed at a considerable cost the previous year and now prove the value of this investment. Dodge City was built for the livestock trade, isolating itself from the conditions that made the livestock trade possible. This is a paradox within the building. The wealth generated by the exposure of humans and animals to harsh environments is used to create environments that cannot be penetrated by harsh environments. This hotel is a monument to this principle. Its thick walls and multiple layers of protection represent the profits accumulated during the summer when cars come every week and money flows like whiskey. Every kind of comfort inside is exchanged for the discomfort of others, although such an exchange is rarely publicly acknowledged. The foundation of the building is 6 feet below the frost line, fixed to the bedrock and capable of supporting the weight of several generations. The bottom of the wall is 2 feet thick. Bricks, stones and plaster mixed together form a barrier that lasts longer than the people who build it. In the small apartment in the town, the wife and daughters of the rancher and the manager of the cattle company were waiting for the storm to end in a relatively comfortable environment. They read novels, do needlework and write letters that they don't send until the storm comes. Mrs. Catherine Morrison was sitting by the coal stove, reading the latest series of romantic novels in Harper's Weekly. Her husband manages the business for an investment group in Boston. This story tells of a brave pioneer who rescues an unminus Jewish Eastern woman from all kinds of dangers, all of which are described as exciting impossibilities. She has been reading this magazine for 3 years. She has been reading various serialized stories that depict the West as a place of adventure and mobility. These stories met some of her needs, provided the stimulation that her own life lacked, and at the same time never threatened her true comfort. In the next room, her daughter was practicing scales on an upright piano. In the dry winter air, the notes were slightly flat. This daughter is 16 years old and is studying at a correctional school in St. Louis. She has never prepared herself for any life except the kind of protected and comfortable life she is currently leading. The education this girl received focused on achievements rather than skills, and on making her an attractive prospect for marriage, rather than a capable adult. She can recite poems, paint landscapes, play simple piano pieces, and talk happily about recognized topics. Some people are worried that their father or husband is within the range, but their concerns are abstract and lack direct experience. They imagine the cold as an intensified chill felt when walking from the living room to the bedroom, rather than a real threat to survival. When they pray, like many of them, they ask God to protect their people from danger, but they don't quite understand what danger means. The storm images in their minds come from paintings of illustrations, romantically rendering scenes and capturing drama rather than suffering. Their prayers were sincere, but disconnected from the reality they were facing. They were speaking to a God they imagined to be kind and considerate in a warm room. They believe that prayers will be answered and those who deserve protection will be protected. Social activities go on as usual regardless of the weather. Here, there are card parties, informal balls and music evenings, where young women showcase their achievements in piano and vocal music. Mrs. Elelon Knockade, the wife of a major shareholder of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, held a tea party on the worst day of the snowstorm. 12 women gathered in her living room, sipping tea in porcelain cups and discussing the upcoming spring social season. The tea set was a wedding gift from Mrs. Kinkai's mother, packed in a custom minus-made crate lined with velvet and transported from Philadelphia. Each cup is painted with exquisite roses. These are the works of artisans who have spent their entire lives decorating porcelain for people they have never met. The tea itself originated from China. The expensive tea traveled across half the globe to a living room in Kansas. It was prepared in accordance with the specific procedures that Mrs. Cunningham had learned from her mother. Heat the water to the precise temperature and soak the leaves for an exact time. The women wore woolen basins and dresses in the afternoon, with high collars and long sleeves, which were fashionable but not luxurious. Their jewelry is very simple. Embossed brooches, simple gold chains and wedding rings minus these plain ornaments, not only display wealth, but also demonstrate etiquette. These clothes were all purchased from catalogs or during trips to big cities. The carefully selected clothes take into account both style and appropriateness. Too much showing off can make one seem vulgar. Too little means insufficient means, and women master these social calculations with proficient skills. The topic of this storm emerged naturally, but it appeared as a backdrop rather than a crisis. The weather is so bad, someone said, and everyone else agreed. Then, they began to discuss the new fabrics that would appear once the train resumed operation. A lady mentioned that her husband seemed to be concentrating on the reports about the northern mountains, and others also expressed sympathetic voices. But the conversation soon shifted to more pleasant topics, talking about the hats and garden plans for spring, as well as the social activities marking the end of winter. This transformation is not ruthless but very natural. It is the result of the thinking of those who have never received training in thinking difficulties. From a young age, they were taught to maintain a pleasant atmosphere, to ease difficult topics, and to focus on pleasant things rather than annoying ones. This does not mean that they do not care. Several of these women have genuine feelings for the cowboys who work on their own ranches. However, care from a distance is different from that obtained through shared pain. However, the pain was not directly experienced by the living room class. They remembered each cowboy, those who had worked for their families for many years with names, faces and personal experiences. However, even though this particularity remains abstract, it is filtered through the formal distance between employers and employees, as well as between owners and workers. A woman recalled a special cowboy who taught her son to ride horses, carved wooden animals for the children, and was always respectful and kind. But she only got to know him when he was serving, never when he was in trouble or in doubt. In Denver, even away from the direct impact of the storm, the cattle market remains open. Investors buy and sell large quantities of stocks they have never seen before, and these stocks mainly exist in accounting books. The market's response to the snowstorm was typically volatile. The initial panic, a sharp sell, minus off, and then a gradual recovery as buyers realized that dead cattle meant a reduction in supply, which would eventually push up prices. The disaster of the Cowboys means opportunities for speculators. People gathered in the Denver Exchange building, a 4-story structure made of red bricks and stones, where machines of the Western Financial Corporation were housed. They looked at the blackboard, on which the prices were updated every quarter of an hour. The numbers representing living animals have been simplified to abstract values. This building was constructed 2 years ago, aiming to demonstrate permanence and seriousness. Its lobby is paved with marble. Its office has walnut paneling. Its windows are high and well-lit, making business activities feel clean and reasonable. Some of them have never been to a ranch, never seen herding cattle, and never witnessed the actual work funded by their investment with their own eyes. Their knowledge comes from reports and statistics, from carefully planned model operation tours, and from the confident demonstrations of James Patterson and others. They believe that cattle are commodities, assets that appreciate or depreciate according to market forces. Real animals, their individual lives, their sufferings, their deaths, all remain in theory and have never been confronted in a concrete and undeniable form. At the Windsor Hotel, perhaps the best building between Chicago and San Francisco, railway magnates and mining barons come together to fend off the storm in their own way. Here, luxury is even more evident. Belgian carpets, Italian marble, champagne rooms minus the entertainment expenses for one night are more than a cowboy's annual income. The lobby of this hotel is characterized by a rosewood carved staircase. Each balloon is handcrafted by artisans in St. Louis. The carpet beneath it was woven in Brussels with patterns specially designed for Windsor, integrating Western designs, cowskulls, mountains and exquisite European wild roses. These rosewood-esque come from the forests of Honduras. They are felled by workers with very low daily wages and then transported to the north by ship, carrying both luxury goods and raw materials. Each piece of work is selected based on texture and color. Dark stellar wood is more expensive. The ceiling of the restaurant was painted by an Italian artist who spent 2 years in Denver and created exquisite classical scene murals. The statues and heroes walked back and forth on the plaster, their muscular bodies and flowing robes completely disconnected from the cruel scenery seen through the window. This artist works on scaffolding 30 feet above the ground. Every morning he freshly mixes his paints together and applies layer upon layer, maintaining a vivid image for decades. He received a generous reward but found an very wild and counted the days, waiting to return to Florence. These people have the infrastructure that makes the cattle industry possible, railways that transport beef to the east, livestock farms that process livestock, and banks that provide funds for the cattle industry. They were just a few steps away from the actual work on the ranch, a distance that was both comfortable and profitable. Their wealth comes from convenience rather than production, from controlling the channels of value flow rather than creating value themselves. They have pipelines for industrial water and they charge for every drop of water. Hamilton Pierce was such a person who made a fortune by integrating a small cattle farm into a large company. He believes that this snowstorm is a correction, an elimination of inefficient operators who lack capital reserves to absorb catastrophic losses. Pierce was a pioneer in applying industrial principles to pastures. He did not regard cattle as individual animals but as production units. His company manages tens of thousands of employees from multiple regions, a scale that was considered impossible by the previous generation. He studied the consolidation of manufacturing in the eastern United States and the ways in which small workshops were replaced by large factories. He believes that there is no reason why the same principle cannot be applied to pastures agriculture and any enterprise that can benefit from economies of scale. In the smoking room of the Windsor Hotel, he was drinking brandy while explaining his theory to his colleagues. Only the strong can survive, gentlemen. Those who plan well, diversify their investments and understand that nature is just another variable to calculate will become stronger this winter than before. His audience nodded and acknowledged his logic, although they felt a vague unease about his indifference. However, when you are warm, fed and wealthy, protecting you from the influence of your own theories, discomfort is easily overlooked. The brandy they drink is Napoleon cognac, which was distilled in France decades ago, aged in oak barrels, and then traveled a long distance across the Atlantic Ocean and then across the European continent. The value represented by each cup is more concentrated than what most cowboys see in a month of hard work. This cognac is produced by a family that has been making brandy for 4 generations. The grapes used come from specific vineyards in the cognac region. The distillation process alone took several months. Aging takes several years. The result is that the price of this liquid seems absurd for something that can be consumed within minutes. The smoking room itself is a luxurious study for men. The leather chair is the column of tobacco. The walls were inlaid with a strong smell of walnut wood, and the mixed smoke of Cuban cigars and Turkish cigarettes filled the air. This is a space that makes men feel important and enhances their sense of control over the outside world. These cigars are hand-rolled in Havana. Each one undergoes quality inspection, wrapped in cedar skin and transported in moistened containers. These cigarettes are custom-blended. Their tobacco comes from 3 different regions and is blended according to a formula that has been refined over many years. The contrast between these 2 worlds minus the warm living rooms of Dodge City and Denver and the icy and snowy Dakota territory minus is not only geographical but also philosophical. A world believes in mastery and control and that the power of capital and organization can overcome any obstacle. This belief is not completely groundless. After all, these people built railways across mountains, established cities in deserts, and created huge wealth on land that was once regarded as wilderness in people's memory. Their success strengthened their belief that proper planning and sufficient funds can solve any problem. They witnessed railways conquering distance, electric lights conquering darkness, and modern medicine conquering disease. Every victory over the limitations of nature has strengthened their belief that human intelligence and ingenuity can overcome any challenge. The other world knows different truths, which naturally cannot be mastered and can only be endured. This kind of control is merely an illusion and can only be maintained when the wind starts to blow. This kind of survival often depends on luck and stubbornness rather than planning or wisdom. These lessons were learned by the cowboys from their direct experiences, from the nights when there was no middle ground in their life minus death choices. They understand from their own bodies that the people in the living room only know that this is a theory. That is, the promises of the West are conditional and are often revoked without warning. If the men in the living room were to face these facts directly, they would not deny them. But they don't have to face them. This is the significance of the living room. The double-glazed windows and the coal-burning stove in the distance. They can abstractly recognize the hardships of life on the frontier without feeling the burden on themselves. They can talk about the resilience of cowboys with admiration without having to test their own. One can profit from risks while completely transferring the risks to others. They can experience the frontier as a concept rather than a reality, can participate in its myth, and at the same time avoid its demands. When the snowstorm finally passes, when the death toll is tallied and the losses are calculated, they will absorb the economic impact and continue to operate because they have sufficient reserves. Their company was built precisely for this purpose, and its capital level is sufficient to enable it to survive the shock that might destroy smaller operators. Losses are just another column on the accounting books, painful but not fatal, absorbed by reducing dividends rather than personal bankruptcy. The company structure itself provides isolation, spreading risks among multiple investors so no one bears a catastrophic loss. This is another way to achieve double-glazed windows, serving as a buffer between the harsh reality outside and the comfort inside. The surviving cowboys will return to work for them because there is no other choice. The deceased will be replaced, for there are always more people willing to test themselves with the promises of the West. The labor market operates on the basis of despair and hope, and on the basis of constantly providing young people who believe in myths rather than reality. For every cowboy who froze to death or gave up and returned to the East, another came here with fresh optimism and an empty pocket. These young people come from farms where mechanization is reducing job opportunities and from cities where factory work is painful and humiliating. The West represents freedom, even though this freedom is accompanied by hardships and risks. This system will continue, with heat concentrated at the top and cold distributed at the bottom, because that's how the system is designed. It is not necessarily malicious, but rather through the natural classification of society. Capital is more important than labor, comfort is more important than endurance, and the safety of distance is more important than the honesty of sharing risks together. An unequal structure exists in every transaction, every employment contract, and every article of association. Those with capital set the rules, and it is no surprise that these rules favor those who set them, forming a feedback loop where wealth is concentrated and difficulties are dispersed. After returning to Dodge City, the night deepened and the whiskey flowed more freely. The conversation in the Dodge family's reception room became philosophical. Someone raised a question: what is the difference between savagery, elegance, and savagery? This issue was triggered by a recent article published in Harper's Monthly about cleansing the border, which discussed what would replace the lawlessness and violence typical of settling in the West. Those present regarded themselves as pioneers of a new stage, bringing order and civilization to the chaos. It is unanimously agreed that civilization is precisely such an ability that protects itself from the cruelty of nature and creates warmth and order in a cold and chaotic world. According to this definition, the man in the living room is the highest achievement of civilization, completely free from discomfort. The progress they talk about is measured by the distance from necessities and by the layers of protection between the human body and the natural world. The more servants there are, the more machines there will be, and the more walls there will be between people and the weather. These are all signs of progress. No one mentioned that their comfort was built on the discomfort of others, nor did anyone mention that the profits from tonight's entertainment activities came from those cowboys struggling to survive in the ice and snow. Some of them might have had such an idea but didn't say it out loud. To say this is tantamount to admitting that, according to their definition, civilization is not a universal interest, but a local advantage. Their warmth needs the coldness of others, their leisure, the labor of others, their safety, and the risks of others. To say so would be tantamount to acknowledging a disturbing fact that their civilization was parasitic and dependent on the suffering of those who truly engaged with the frontiers rather than merely investing in them. Admission requires response, defense, or change. Change is unimaginable. The entire structure of their wealth and power depends on the current arrangements. Defense is possible, but it is exhausting and mentally demanding. It becomes even more difficult when making clear statements rather than simple assumptions. So the conversation turned to safer topics, politics, gossip, and despite the heavy losses in the winter, plans for expansion in the spring. The pianist continued to play the cheerful melody. The fire in the stove was burning warmly, and the snow on the window was accumulating higher and higher. Someone told a humorous story about a novice from Boston who was looking forward to the West being as described in cheap novels. The story ended with the novice fleeing back to the East after a night's sleep outdoors. The men burst into laughter, revealing the relaxed superiority of those who had never slept outdoors before. Laughter is sincere and stories are interesting. No one considers the cruelty hidden in seeking humor and others' discomfort. Tenderfoot became a symbol of Oriental tenderness, confirming the self-minus image of these Western men, although their own relationship with suffering was theoretical. The topic turned to the upcoming spring into a comprehensive report that would reveal the true extent of winter damage. They made plans, discussed strategies, and considered unexpected events, all based on the assumption that no matter how severe the losses were, the operation would continue. Outside, Blizzard continues its democratic work, denying the distinction between the cattle owned by big companies and those owned by small operators. But internally, the differences remain quite obvious. Some people spent the winter in the living room, while others endured it on horseback. The losses caused by the storm have nothing to do with the ownership structure or market valuation, but the ability to absorb these losses is allocated according to precise grades. Nature may be indifferent to human arrangements, but human society is not. Recovery will follow the logic of capital rather than random weather. When spring comes, the basic arrangements will remain unchanged. The cowboys would gather the surviving cattle, drive them to the market, and collect meager wages. They will bury their deceased, care for their frostbite, and then sign the next season's contract, because the other options are worse. Some people will switch to other jobs or fields. but the majority will remain in the only profession they know and the only life they have prepared for. Cattle tycoons will assess their losses, restructure their businesses, and continue to build their empires. This system will continue to exist because it is designed to persist, by distributing pain downward and concentrating security upward, thus surviving in chaos. Financial losses will be absorbed through complex mechanisms, insurance payouts, adjustments to stock valuations, and renegotiations of loans. Individual investors may suffer losses, but the system itself will adapt and continue because it is larger than any individual participant. This is another truth about the Wild West, a truth that doesn't appear in legends or songs. Freedom and suffering are closely linked. The frontier promised independence to cowboys also created conditions for their exploitation. Those who have hardly experienced any romance can only maintain the romance of the open pasture through the cold and exhaustion, as well as the faint hope of getting through the next winter. Myths serve everyone's purpose. It attracts labor, justifies low wages, and provides a cultural narrative that makes barbaric behavior seem heroic. If cowboys consider themselves free individuals rather than exploited workers, they are less likely to organize and less likely to demand better working conditions. The night spent at the Dodgers came to an end as usual. People shook hands with each other, planning to get together again. They lay on comfortable beds in the warm rooms, convinced that the morning would bring a warm breakfast and new opportunities. The storm outside is howling, but everything inside is peaceful and prosperous, with no consequences at all. The last log was placed on the fire. The pianist took the money and walked into the snowy street. The waiters finished their last glass of wine and turned off the gas lamp in the living room. The hotel settled down in the quiet rhythm of the night, and the guests had already fallen into a warm slumber. 300 meters to the north, cowboys gather around a fire that is about to go out, or there is no fire at all, waiting for the dawn to come. They are not sure if they will see the dawn. Only one kind of stubbornness can keep them going, and that stubbornness is that when reason demands to stop, the body still keeps moving. Two worlds a storm, the vast distance between comfort and survival is something no romance can bridge. The blizzard of 1886 has finally passed, just like all storms. Spring gradually came to the northern plains, melting the snow and revealing what was hidden beneath. Thousands of cow carcasses were scattered on the pasture. The ghost fire was engraved on the stone, and the boundary was forever changed. Carl's Goodnight rebuilt his herd in the following years, although he never reached the same scale of operation again. Those who have survived the winter always bear the marks of cold on their frostbitten fingers. They have endless white nightmares, silently realizing that they have seen something that most people have never seen before, the absolute limit of human endurance. The cattle breeding industry has recovered, developed, and become more cautious. Ranchers have learned to raise smaller herds, to maintain emergency feed supplies, and to respect what winter can do when reminding people of their place. Those cowboys who died in the snowstorm left almost no trace. Some people made marks in the cemetery of the town, and their names were carved on the already rotten wood. The others remained where they had fallen, their bones scattered due to the weather and time. Anonymous contributions to the land on which they depend for survival. Ghost fires remain a symbol of this land, although fewer people remember their significance every year. Archaeologists have recorded them. Occasionally, tourists come to visit. But their true purpose as monuments of endurance and as prayers made of stone and ashes is gradually being forgotten. In Dodge City and Denver, in all the warm places where cattle tycoons gather, the snowstorm becomes a story, then a statistic, and then almost a memory. The system they established has persisted and evolved into modern enterprises, modern markets, and the modern distance between owners and workers. But beyond the pasture, the cold wind still sweeps across the vast grassland. Winter still comes like a judgment, yet memories exist in another form. Not in the story, nor in the statistics, but on this land, in the strange silence in some places. In the place where the grass grows differently, in the place where the cows die, in the place where the fire burns, in the place where people make their last resistance against the unbearable cold. If you stand on the plateau at dawn, with sunlight shining from the southeast and the air still cold at night, you might hear it. like the creaking of leather, like the stomping of a horse, like the muttering of a person to an animal. It might just be a problem with the wind. That's just your imagination that fills silence with meaning. But it could also be for other reasons. Perhaps this is the echo of that winter, still reverberating through time. Still insist on being remembered by those who are willing to listen. The cowboys did not ask to be heroes. They just asked to survive. One more night, one more storm, one more winter. Most of them survived, although the places where they lived were often more difficult than the places where they survived. They grew old slowly, working in the place where they were frozen, doing the same job and earning the same meager salary, watching the border drawn nearer and nearer. The legend revolved around a life they knew was far from as romantic as the story described. They have become relics of their own era, vividly reminding people that that era has been mythologized and turned into something that never existed. When they died on the beds in the town, most of them were not within the range they might have liked. In the photos they left behind, their eyes looked older than their age. They remained silent, stubbornly refusing to talk about that winter, or any winter, knowing that words couldn't describe everything they had experienced. The knowledge they left behind was passed on to future generations. Getting through terrifying things doesn't eliminate fear, it only proves that you are strong enough, lucky enough, or stubborn enough to get through it. The modern world keeps us from that kind of cold. We have central heating, weather forecasts, emergency services and supply chains. All the infrastructure that isolates us from the worst emotions of nature. We can sit in a comfortable room and read about the snowstorm of 1886, imagining what it must have been like, but we have never truly understood it. Perhaps this is what should be. Perhaps every generation has the right to be warmer, safer and more protected than the previous one. But in this comfort, something was also lost. Human beings can tolerate knowledge of almost anything. The body and mind can survive under seemingly impossible conditions. When everything is stripped away, warmth, security and hope, what remains is an animal minus-like stubbornness, refusing to give up. Cowboys who have experienced major disasters know this. On their frozen fingers, on their frostbitten turns, in the nightmares that woke them up years later, and when they panted on the warm bed, they were convinced that they were still there. Tonight, as you fall asleep slowly in your warm bed, think of those people. It's not the legendary romantic cowboys, but real humans. They wake up in the darkness, put on frozen boots and ride into the storm that wants to kill them. Remember, they do this not once, but again and again, day after day, week after week. When they stop, it will be easier for them to keep moving forward, to be understood and forgiven. Remember, the West they experienced was not the one in movies and novels, but a place where survival itself is a victory. There, even if you lose everything along the way, it still means you have won. When you fall asleep, when you are immersed in the comfort of being isolated from the harshness of the world, let this image disappear. Anand was riding on a horse, wrapped in frozen leather, crossing the endless white, running towards a dawn he couldn't see, but he refused to stop believing. The cold wind howled and pierced through his bones. He continued cycling, because that's exactly what cowboys do. They continued cycling. Somewhere on the high plain, within the circle of stones, among the scattered bones, in the strange silence, truth still exists. It is not written in a book, nor engraved on a monument, but inscribed in this land in a language of patience that requires no translation. The blizzard passed, spring came, and the grass grew again. The cowboys, those who survived and those who didn't, all became part of this land where they struggled desperately to survive. Dust and memories, stones and stories, gradually fade away in the same silence. Take a break now. Let warmth embrace you. Sleep comfortably and know that others endure the cold, so that we will remember what endurance looks like. The wind still blew across the Dakota plain. It still snows every winter. On this vast white land, the ghosts of cowboys are always riding horses, always driving the cattle that no longer exist, and always chasing the spring that will never come. But now that's their burden, not yours. Sleeps soundly. The passion for dreams. When you wake up, just remember this. They survived to make you feel comfortable. This is a monument.